China, confront China in 2014, but they have succeeded in selling products to China. Again, I'd like to reiterate, some people are worried that if we stand up to China, they might boycott our exports, but this is not so in the case of Vietnam. So maybe we should really study how Vietnam does diplomacy, economic diplomacy, and strategic diplomacy in order to achieve their overall objective. It is the 24th largest export economy in the world. And I mentioned already their export destination. Now I'd like to talk about the proposal for a Philippine-China joint oil exploration in the Reed Bank or Recto Bank. People are asking, what is my opinion? Well, from the economic point of view, this is good because this would mean being able to exploit our natural resources in the Reed Bank. Reed Bank is quite a big feature. It's about 8,000 square kilometers. How big is 8,000 square kilometers? Quezon City is about 160 square kilometers. Metro Manila is about 600 square kilometers. Reed Bank is 8,000, more than 10 times the size of Metro Manila, and reputed to be rich in natural gas and oil. But very important in considering a joint venture there is the provision of the Constitution that says, Article 12, Section 2, that it must be Filipino. It must be reserved, the marine wealth must be reserved to Filipino citizens. In other words, if it is a juridical person, at least 60% Filipino. So whatever joint venture we'll have there must be at least 60% Filipino. And that will be a dilemma to both sides. We don't know whether China would accept that. And of course, definitely, the Philippines cannot accept anything lower than 60% because that would be a violation of our Constitution. The other consideration is that the most likely joint venture partner is a giant company, China National Offshore Oil Corporation. My worry there is that they will bring in their oil rig. We don't have an oil rig. They have two giant oil rigs. They will bring in their oil rig, and that oil rig will very most likely be escorted by the Coast Guard ships or even Navy ships. If that happens, are we going to allow that? Because if we allow that, we would have Chinese vessels securing an area inside our exclusive economic zone. There would be some violation there. And we all know that a Chinese company is almost indistinguishable from the Chinese government, especially a state-owned company like the CNOOC. Are they going to comply with international laws? What kind of business laws would apply here? In case of a dispute, how would the dispute be settled? And if, for example, in the end, the kind of business practices they have, the Chinese Coast Guard, they have CNOC is reported to have a bad human rights record in Myanmar, and finally, it will be an unequal joint venture because the CNOC is a giant corporation. In business, you try to avoid having a joint venture with someone much bigger than you because that partner will have more lawyers, more money, more muscle. It will be an uneven joint venture. And as I said, finally, should we decide to terminate the joint venture, in case we find out that it's not advantageous to us or they're not following the agreement of the joint venture, how do we tell them to go away? They did not go away in Scarborough Shoal. They stayed in Mississippi. They're still there. And in fact, militarizing. So these are the things that we will encounter in case of a joint venture. Although it's very tempting because the South China Sea boasts of about $60 trillion of natural gas and oil. Not all of that is inside our exclusive economic zone. There was a study conducted by a Philippine Air Force general as a paper in his Command and General Staff course, where he said that in the Philippines you can find as much as $24 trillion worth of natural gas and oil. So as I said, that's very tempting, but that economic consideration should always be balanced with our security consideration. That's very important. So now I talked about let's talk about the strategic situation. The strategic situation has changed very much during the past 1 year or so. Now we have the quadrilateral alliance, I mentioned that already, India, Japan, Australia, and America. And look at the geography of the quadrilateral alliance. We have India there, you have China, you have Australia, which is an Indo-Pacific power because it has an Indian Ocean coastline and a Pacific Ocean coastline. And of course, the United States, which is all over the world, and Japan, which is a Western Pacific power. The concept of the Quad was broached initially in 2007 by Japan, but nothing came out. But during the ASEAN meeting here in the Philippines last November, the leaders of the 4 countries were able to meet and discuss the possibility of this quadrilateral grouping. And you can see the picture of them wearing handsome Barong Tagalog. Well, talking about the quadrilateral, you have Turnbull of Australia, Prime Minister Modi of India, Prime Minister Abe of Japan, and President Trump of the United States. And in terms of economic strength, the Quad represents very big economies. The U.S. has a GDP, as of the writing here, I think it's a little bigger now, but it has a GDP of 18.5 trillion. Japan, $4.9 trillion. India, $2.2 trillion. And Australia, $1.2 trillion for a combined GDP of $26.8 trillion compared to China's GDP of $11.2 trillion. As you can see, China's GDP is still way below the GDP of the United States. I think if you ask me, at the present growth rate of both the US and India, it would take maybe about 10 years for the 2 GDPs to become equal. In terms of military power, the number 1 military power is still the US, number 4 is Japan, number 5 is India, sometimes it's ranked number 4, and number 22 Australia, while China is ranked number 3 in the world. So you can see the comparative military power of the Quad compared to China. And yet the Indo-Indian Ocean geo-strategic situation. India has tried to strengthen its control of the Indian Ocean, but there have been some challenges. Here's a latest report that they've done. They've strengthened their NORDEP, North Bay of Bengal, ANDEP in the Andamans and Nicobar. This is very close to the entry to the Strait of Malacca. There are regular naval exercises there. Gulf Dep in the northern Arabian Sea is very close to the Persian Gulf. Pog Dep in the Gulf of Aden. This is already in the Horn of Africa area. And then Sendep in the Maldives and Sri Lanka. And IO Dep in the South Indian Ocean in the Mauritius and Seychelles and Madagascar. So you can see that the Indian Navy is spreading out as a counteraction to the entry also of the Chinese Navy. And they had a maritime reconnaissance exercise. They have their long-range maritime reconnaissance. They have P-8 Poseidons, India's P-8 Poseidons. And here, and these are the points that I mentioned as far as India preparations are concerned in the Indian Ocean. You can see that they're trying as much as possible to cover the entire Indian Ocean, not only the vicinity of India, but really very far from India, very close to the coast of Africa. And U.S. carrier, U.S. also showed its, there was a show of force. U.S. carrier, this is now in the South China Sea. U.S. carrier sailing into the disputed area of the South China Sea. And what we have witnessed in the past month have been show of force and counter show of force in the South China Sea. The Liaoning had a show of force in late March in the South China Sea with live fire exercises conducted, escorted by an armada of 40 ships. That is quite a big show of force. An aircraft carrier of China with an armada of 40 Chinese ships. The U.S. Navy responded by a sortie of the USS Theodore Roosevelt. And in fact, when I was writing this, there were 3 U.S. carriers in the vicinity in the South China Sea and also in the Western Pacific area. So I understand that there might be a possibility of a 3-carrier exercise, unprecedented, to be conducted in the future as another show of force. The U.S. policy in the South China Sea is expected to become very assertive and muscular, with President Trump at the helm, supported by Defense Secretary Mattis, Marine Corps General, State Secretary Pompeo, a graduate of West Point and former CIA director, and new National Security Bolton, who's considered to be really very hawkish. All of them are considered to be very hawkish. This means that the Pacific Command's desire to have more freedom of navigation operations in the South China Sea will have White House, Pentagon, and State Department support. And then in the case of the U.S. carriers, they have a new player. They have the amphibious assault ships. These are not aircraft carriers like the Nimitz class, but these are amphibious assault ships that can now carry F-35B fighter planes, short takeoff and vertical landing. And these are game changers in the Western Pacific area because the F-35 stealth is reputed to be a fighter plane that is difficult to challenge because of their stealth capability. It's a game changer. Reportedly directed at North Korea, but can easily cover the Western Pacific, especially in the Japan area. But China also responded with another show of force, presided by no less than President Xi of China, when they had a large-scale naval review, a naval display in the South China Sea, consisting of a procession of 10,000 naval officers, 76 fighter planes, and a flotilla of 48 warships and submarines. This is the naval review of China in the South China Sea. So what we're seeing here is a show of force and a counter show of force, which makes the situation very hairy. Because if there is some miscalculation there, with big powers confronting each other, but of course some people are saying that the show of force may be a formula to prevent conflict when one side is convinced that the other side has a preponderance of force and it would not be prudent to initiate conflict. If the other side will remain silent, it might embolden one side and might make it more aggressive. But if the show of force is convincing, the other side might say, oh, not now. We're still outnumbered. The other force is still bigger. But then, of late, all of a sudden, we've witnessed the rapid militarization of the South China Sea by China. One of the first reports was the deployment of jamming equipment in this practice. Jamming equipment in Mississippi Reef, in Subi, in Fiery Cross, and we all know what a jammer can do. it can distort our communications here. It can reach as far as the Western Command, Metro Manila,